Hello and welcome to the Chronicles of Dragonlance. In this show, my co-host and I delve into the novels and stories of the incredibly famous and lengthy fantasy series Dragonlance. We're going to go book by book and delve into the secrets that made this series so groundbreaking and legendary. But tell me, John, what is Dragonlance?
So for me, Dragonlance is the prototypical fantasy series. When I think genre fantasy fiction, the first thing I think of, even before Tolkien, I think of a half-elf, a dwarf, and an annoying hobbit-like creature named Hasselhoff Barefoot. Also, what I think is really interesting about the Dragonlance series is, for me, it was the first shared world that I knew about. It was the first time I knew that multiple authors were writing in the same shared setting. So I know Star Wars did this. I know H.P. Lovecraft did it. It was the first one that sort of did it officially. And H.P. Lovecraft is often credited for being the first shared universe, but it wasn't an organized... Lovecraft had terrible branding. He gave all his stuff away. And a big part of the Dragonlance is that they seemed to recognize that it was a world that people loved and that other people wanted to play in that world.
I think that Dragonlance actually is one of the first truly omni-media productions. It was started as both a series of gaming modules for Dungeons & Dragons, a series of novels that followed along the same kind of adventures of the modules, and then also things like board games, miniatures, maps, accessories, a couple of video games back in the 80s. It was truly an entire omni-media system, really. It was a whole shared universe, and it really was one of the first, broadly commercial shared universes, in the sense of you could go to a Walden Books or a B. Dalton in anywhere in the 90s and pick up Dragonlance novels all over the place. And it really did set up a whole lot of elements that a lot of other series would later take. The idea of having one just cohesive setting, one cohesive intellectual property that other people could write in and tell stories in while keeping the same meta thread going, but without interacting with each other's specific plots, giving you kind of different threads and stuff to needle, that would give consumers this whole universe to delve into, and it gave companies a way to have them all under kind of one umbrella. So Dragonlance eventually ended up with 200-something novels told over the course of 20, 25 years. It was just this incredibly epic series that did so many things first that a lot of people will look back at it now as oh, look at how trite and boring Dragonlance is, without understanding that they were just groundbreaking at the time.
Yeah, I think what's shocking is that these were books that I picked up when I was a kid and then dropped once I hit my mid-teens. When I went to college and I worked at the bookstore, there was still not just a shelf, but shelves that had nothing but Dragonlance and Dragonlance-related Dungeons & Dragon properties that also gained popularity after Dragonlance.
Forgotten Realms, for instance.
Yeah, Forgotten Realms.
But Dark Sun books, there were Greyhawk books, Planescape books. And, we should back up a step, though. Shared World definitely did come from comic books before they came from fantasy novels, but Dragonlance definitely took those comic book ideas and brought them to a world where before Dragonlance, a lot of fantasy series were just one author, one book, one author, 3 books, but not 70 authors, 300 books.
Or it was much looser, right? It wasn't a writer might take Cthulhu, or they might take Michael Moorcock's Hero, right? And they might put references
Elric.
They might put there was an albino long-haired swordsman in my book that doesn't have a name, and so I'm referencing the Michael Moorcock, mythos, the Elric of Melniboné. Or I don't have a Cthulhu in my horror story. I have a Kukulu. But
it's a big squid demon. Just happens to be there.
But it just happens to look and be exactly like Lovecraft. Star Wars, gets credit for the expanded universe and then all the different layers of the expanded universe. But this was that was well-worn territory by the time I think Star Wars got there.
Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms both predate Star Wars shared world universes. Because I remember the first time I saw Timothy Zahn's trilogy, which was the thing that started the whole shared world thing. Dragonlance had been going for almost a decade before that.
Exactly.
And the thing is, it's because in Dragonlance, we have this whole universe where you can go from book to book to book and see how it links back to every other book in the canon and be able to tell a full cohesive story of the entire history of the setting. The fact that you have a setting to talk about at all, is one of those things that just really makes this world tick. And it did things like it influenced anime, like Record of Lodoss Wars was totally taken. Like if you look at the intro from that anime, it was completely taken from Dragonlance module covers, and their world building was taken from Dragonlance as well. You have a lot of JRPGs and Western RPGs that took the tropes. I mean, one of the things we talk about when we're talking about, for instance, in gaming, is the notion of either an open world, like in Grand Theft Auto, where you can run around and do whatever you want, versus a railroaded storytelling, story-driven setting. Before Dragonlance, everything in D&D was very open world, open sandbox. Do what you want. Maybe there's an adventure here. Maybe we've got modules for you. But in Dragonlance was the first time that we had a setting where the author had a start, a middle, and a finish plotted out. And you, the players, were going to go through all 12 of these modules and tell this story that the author had wanted you to tell and wanted you to live through.
You'd hit the beats, even if it was different.
Yeah, and to reiterate that, they did something that nobody had ever done before, which is they put out novels that were matched up to these modules. Not one-to-one, but close enough that if you were reading the books, you could spoil yourself on where the modules were going. Then what they realized that over time was that, I mean, they put out a lot of Dragonlance gaming material, but they also put out so many more novels, and the novels were able to come out much faster than the gaming material, and people could read the novels way faster than they could read the gaming stuff or play the gaming stuff. And the fans of the novels soon overtook the fans of the gaming, to the point that Wizards of the Coast stopped making Dragonlance as game products. TSR stopped making Dragonlance as game products, but novels kept going and kept going and kept going. And eventually, where before it was the game products were driving the novels, later on the novels would tell a story, and then we would go back and make games to fit them.
I think what also this talks is a lot of people talk about how they got into fan fiction through anime and through manga. But I know for a fact that the Dragonlance fan fiction world was huge, and that so many of those authors that show up with published books started writing fanfic of, what if Tannis ended up with Goldmoon? What if Raceland was into people and not a total piece of crap?
I mean, there are folks like Brandon Sanderson, very famous authors who are huge names in their own right, who started off by reading Dragonlance books and writing their own fanfics.
And so many of those fanfics stopped being fanfics and became actual fiction, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But we should actually stop for a second and tell the audience who we are.
Yeah, I'll go first. My name's Jonathon Howard. I'm almost 40 years old. I've been into fantasy for as long as I can remember. Before I was reading it, it was, watching the Rankin Bass Hobbit cartoon, listening to my dad retell stories that he had read in genre fiction. And Dragonlance really was my gateway. Read kids' books, Wayside stories for Wayside School. My first encounter with an elf was Tannis. My first encounter with a dwarf was Flint. I didn't come to The Hobbit until years after I had read the Dragonlance novels. And so they really were my gateway. And, as to my personals, I work for the state of California. I do legislative stuff. My hobbies are hiking, running, playing with Transformers, video games. I love reading. I'm kind of hung up on the history of Christianity, and so I dig deep into that. That's part of my background. But Shivam, why don't you tell us who you are?
Yeah, so my name is Shivam Bhatt, and I am a Dragonlance superfan. It's weird to say that. That's like one of those most arrogant things you could possibly say. But I have the receipts, as it were. So I got introduced to Dragonlance around 1988 or so, when I was growing up in small town Massachusetts, and my friend Harper M. Rajashekar had these books that he would bring with us to middle school, and we would be sitting in the school bus going to class, and he had this bright blue book with this incredible looking dragon on the front, and I needed to know what it was. And of course, it was Dragons of Winter Night. And he's like, yeah, this is book 2. Do you want to read book 1? And I'm like, boy, do I, because I had just read The Hobbit, and I was primed to be reading real big boy books instead of just like, Fudge or like Tales of the fourth grade nothing or whatever Judy Blume book I was reading at the time.
Beverly Cleary's Ramona.
Yeah, seriously, that whole family of universes. Yeah. And so I had this big, thick book, and I just delved into it. I dissolved those first 3 books in like a month, which is, when you're in like 5th or 6th grade, is insane. That is insane reading capacity. Not even 5th grade, it was 4th grade that I was reading these. And I went and I became instantly hooked. The first Dragonlance books I bought were the Dragonlance Legends. Then I bought like all the preludes and meetings that were out at the time, all the heroes books, the short stories. Over time, I grew to have one of the largest Dragonlance collections in the world, including all the published materials of all the game product. I played a lot of Dragonlance games. I ran a lot of Dragonlance games. I had all the foreign editions. I had all the, recovers. And every time they would put out a new edition, when TSR got bought by Wizard, got bought by Hasbro, and changed the logos on the side, I had to have them. It got to the point that my wife was like, okay, look, you don't need 35 copies of Dragons of Autumn Twilight. And I'm like, yeah, I do. It's like, I could ask you a page number and you can recite it to me. And I'm like, yeah, yes, that is also true. But, and she's like, no buts. So I had to, I ended up shrinking back down to just the core 250 novels or whatever it ended up being. But the point is, like, I have, trucker hats and Zippo lighters and the whole thing. And I was a deeply devout member of the Dragonlance mailing list and alt-fan Dragonlance news groups back in the day. And I became a really good friend with a lot of the authors. And to the point that now, Margaret Weis, author of the main Dragonlance novels, whenever she gets a Dragonlance question, she will just text me. And she'll just ask me to answer this question so that she can answer it on whatever con she's on or on Twitter or whatever. And over the years, I've helped a lot of authors with continuity and with understanding the setting. I got to work on the Dragonlance 3.5 edition source books for Margaret Weis Productions. I got to write the books on dragons. And also, I'm one of the only 3 authors to ever write about Talatis in canon, which makes me super stoked. I'm sorry, Talatis is one of my favorite settings. It was the first D&D box that I ever bought was the Time of the Dragon, which was a box set introducing the second continent of Dragonlance, Talatis, which didn't get novels until about like 20 years later, which most of the core Dragonlance authors and creators super hated because it was done behind their back. But it was enough to introduce me to this world and give me this whole universe to just dive into. Like, the Dragonlance books always spoke to me because I was growing up, like, I'm an Indian guy, and I grew up in central Massachusetts, which is not necessarily South Asian territory. And
so many Indians in
yeah, and I'm just saying, like, when I'm reading the story of Tanis Half-Elven and he's telling me about his problems with alienation and being misunderstood and trying to figure out what culture he fits in and not fitting in with his parents' culture, not fitting in with the culture he's living in, as a 12 to 13-year-old, that spoke to me at a level that I took me 30 years to understand.
That's so funny, because I just want to say that I felt the same way growing up in Southern California as a devout Mormon. I was constantly dealing with, like, how do I be a part of Mormon culture? How do I be this good, upstanding, LDS
Kid.
Christian?
Yeah.
And then, but, like, I'm in Southern California. Like, it's beaches and sun and...
It is not Mormon country.
It is not Mormon country at all. So it's so true that, like, Tanis has this, that whole half-elf bastard bit about him is just captures kids at that age, because everyone feels alienated some way, right?
Oh, yeah.
But, like,
well, I mean, the characters in Dragonlance, right? Like, Tanis has that alienation of cultural resonance. Where do I belong? Who am I? I'm wearing this beard because it's the only thing I can claim for myself, right? And then there's, like, Raistlin, who is the picked on, bullied kid who just gets trashed by everybody who shows up, and he's like, I'm smarter than all of you and I will prove it. And he does, and of course everybody loves him because he's the nerd who got away. I mean, later on when you grow up, you realize that he's doing everything in a toxic and unhealthy way. But when you're a kid, you're just seeing, oh, look, there's another nerd like me getting bullied. Every character in Dragonlance has that kind of emotional resonance for people who are lost or people who are disconnected from where they are. And that's, I think, what gave this series so much emotional heft. And, like, as a religious guy, the idea of going through fantasy, like, the difference between fantasy and sci-fi is that in fantasy is very much dependent upon an external power, upon magic, upon gods, upon cleric, upon faith, right? Like, you're putting your faith in something, you're growing, you're moving forward. And sci-fi is all about like human ingenuity, technology, learning to do things independently and reliantly. And Dragonlance was very firmly planting its fantasy flag, saying, look, we can do this on our own. And we thrived and we're surviving. But boy, howdy, it is much better if you have some emotional support coming from somewhere else. And that spoke to me a lot. And I mean, eventually, I credit Dragonlance with helping me become a Hindu priest eventually, which is one of those weird things you don't think about. But it informed my faith almost as much as my own parents did. Yeah, Dragonlance is just one of those things that, like, when I went to Gen Con at 2008, in Gen Con in 2008 was, I think, the last Gen Con where the Dragonlance existed, because that was when we were going to have the Dragonlance funeral, which is the novels were coming to an end. There was no more Dragonlance game products coming out. We were going to have a big party to celebrate just like the series. Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman asked me to come up and give a couple of minute speech on behalf of the fans in terms of what Dragonlance has meant to us. And I turned it into like a 45-minute long history lecture of fandom and of what it meant to be Dragonlance and what Dragonlance meant to all of us in terms of just how this series that we grew up with, how it gave us resonance and weight. And it was moving. People cried. It was amazing. But then Dragonlance was dead, right? And so why would we be doing this podcast now in 2021 when Dragonlance has now been dead for like a decade plus? Well, it turns out Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman have decided that they want to take one last drive in the old jalopy before they put her to bed. And so Dragonlance is going to be coming out with 3 brand new novels. What better time to go and revisit this old, beautiful setting than right now, right when it's about to come back?
Have had this idea sitting on the back burner for at least 7 years. When Shivam told me that Weis and Hickman had decided to bring it back, I was like, I can't keep sitting on this idea. I have to move. Like, someone else is going to do this. If I don't, I've sat on this for so long. There's so much epic fantasy out there these days. For God's sakes, HBO ran a series on Game of Thrones. And if you had told kid me that one day a premier subscription cable channel was going to run a fantasy series and turn it into prestige television, I would have just been like, what are you talking? That's insane. No one would ever do that. Like, it's not even considered genre anymore, right? When the biggest movie franchise is the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where everything today is comics or it's video games. It's all this stuff that you and I, right? We're both 40 this year. When we were kids, it was not cool. We're the adults now, and so it is cool. We decided it was cool, and it is cool. Everyone plays video games. Everyone reads genre fiction. It's not genre anymore, right?
When you think about how many Dragonlance books were published, and you think about the fact that you could go to stores in any country in the world, and they would have full column shelves of just Dragonlance books. Like, I know I've bought Dragonlance books in Malaysia and Singapore and Russia, and they're just huge. That means that there were millions and millions of people who were like nerdy kids who have all now grown up to be very nerdy adults who are now just adults, right? Like, all of this stuff that we read when we were like growing up influenced so much that this is just culture now. It's not pop culture. It's just culture.
Yeah. I don't think Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman are getting the credit that they're due, right? H.P. Lovecraft is now lauded as like the creator of modern horror. He's the guy who turned it from, it's just a spooky skeleton to existential, right? To make horror deeper than just the surface level scares. J.R.R. Tolkien is the father of fantasy. And rightly so. George R.R. Martin, Brandon Sanderson, all these people, they're lauded. They're on the interview circuit when their new books come out, right? They're on morning shows. But no one is talking about Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman, and I think that's a real shame. So, like you said, millions of people read these books. They were huge. When did the funeral happen?
I think it was like 2009 or 2010. I mean, the books hadn't finished coming out yet, but I'm pretty sure that it was 2008, 2009. Because the last books ended up coming out about a year later, but they had just been announced, and by that point they had announced that no more novels would be coming out. Yeah, actually, when I look at it, it was 2008, right when the animated movie came out. And boy, howdy, was that a bad movie.
The mainline series, I don't think it's been out of print since they introduced it.
The mainline books have not been out of print since like 1984 when they were first written.
And I can go, and I did go into my local bookstore just to check. You know, we only have one now, and it's not the big box. It's not a Barnes and Noble. It's a local bookstore. They only have the 3, but they're there. Dragons of Autumn Twilight, Dragon and Spring Dawn. Like the 3 are there.
Winter Night and Spring Dawning, right? Like it's totally wild. It's kind of sad that I remember going as a kid and seeing something like 85 Dragonlance novels in a row, and they're all beautiful colored and everything. But also, hey, you know what? The Chronicles and Legends really at the end of the day are the heartbeat of the setting, and you can't go wrong by picking them up. They still hold up.
They anchor it.
They're a complete meal unto themselves. Now, I personally am a big fan of the ancillary product. I'm a big fan of the Fifth Age, of all of the books, and at some point, you just accept that this is just a part of my life. A Dragonlance book has come out. I'm going to read it. So, but we're here today, and we're going to be getting into talking about these novels, going deep, seeing what they're like, seeing what makes up, where their inspirations come from, and remembering why these books were so cool to begin with.
You know, some people might ask, why you two? Why? And it's clear why Shivam is here. Like he said, he's a super fan. When the authors have questions, they go to him. Why am I here? And that's because I'm a good friend of Shivam's, and we met on the internet years ago. COVID has mean that we don't get to hang out as much as we used to. And everyone keeps telling me that anyone can do a podcast. And so I decided that I am going to do a podcast. And, you know, I kept waiting for someone who was more talented than me, someone who was smarter than me, someone who was more knowledgeable than me to do it. And no one has. And like, I just said, I have to do this. And then they announced the book. And then I was like, I really have to do this. So that's why I'm here. And Shivam's here to help me from going astray.
Because here's the thing, right? Nobody wants to listen to just a hardcore fan just go off about books by themselves. Somebody needs to be able to rein me in and bring me back down to earth before I just get real deep into the weeds with talking about Tinker Gnomes and Thinker Gnomes and the 6 different creation myths of Dragonlance. The point is, though, I love Dragonlance. Dragonlance has been a part of my life since I was like 10 or 11 years old. 30 years is a long time for anything to be part of your life. It's informed so much of what I do and who I am that I love talking about it. I love talking about it more than anything. And it's rare to get a chance to actually talk about Dragonlance. I thought it would be just really fun to share the love of why these series are so cool. You can get all these books at used bookstores or on ebooks or whatever super cheap now. They're all old. They're all out of print. I mean, a lot of these authors are my friends. They still live off their residual royalties of years and years and years. And God knows Wizards of the Coast didn't treat them right very well, but as long as Margaret and Tracy are still ticking, then Dragonlance still has relevance. And while it's got relevance, it's still worth talking about.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'll be honest. I just love talking about Dragonlance. Like, the setting makes me excited every day. Hopefully soon, maybe we'll see a rebirth of Dragonlance and I'll be able to write some more game books.
Yeah, that would be great. What is this going to look like? So I asked Shivam to come up with a list of books that he thought was necessary, right? The mainline books. Not just by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman, though. These were the books that were necessary to get a full grasp of the Dragonlance narrative. I'll be posting that list online, so if listeners want to join in on the reading at some point, they're more than welcome to. Speaking of which, I probably need to make a website, don't I? So I need to get working on that. And then I'm going to read them, taking copious notes, and then each episode, we're going to give an overview of the story, talking about what I've read. And I don't think we can do a book per episode. These, like Shivam was saying, these are 300-pound books. These are tiny bricks that you could build a house of if you have all 200 of them.
I mean, to be fair, though, I remember there was a time when there was Night of the Black Rose, which is the Lord Soth book that had come out for Ravenloft. And I had time to kill when I was in New York. While I was there with the school group and I was waiting for my teachers to do something, and I found a seat in this Barnes & Noble, and I literally just grabbed the book and read it cover to cover in like 2 hours sitting there. And there was a point where I would used to be able to kill a Dragonlance book in like an hour and change, but I'm much older now. Luckily, I don't need to, though. Do you know how Dragonlance was first introduced to the world, John?
I believe it was a series of modules for Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yes, that's what the first product was. But how it was first introduced to the world was in Gen Con in 1984 in Milwaukee, when Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman and the other crew of the original people who were working at TSR, who were working on the project, were sitting there and unveiling this brand new campaign setting. Because up till then, there had been Greyhawk, there had been Lankmar, Mystara, like Forgotten Realms and stuff like that. Dragonlance was a whole brand new project that Tracy Hickman had conceived of. And so Margaret Weis sent her daughter Elizabeth out. She was like 4 or 5 years old, to go out and run around and give people at the con little slips saying, my mommy's going to give a presentation about her book. You should come and see it. And so the little cute girl would be giving you these slips of paper saying, come to room such and such to listen to see the big road show. And when they got there, Margaret, Tracy, and a bunch of the original crew actually sat and had the first novel written out to be like a radio play. So they had a script of Dragons of Autumn Twilight, and each of the different people there were like maybe 8 or 10 of them, picked a different character, and they read out and acted out the story for the people who were there to introduce them to the party, to introduce them.
The entire book?
Not the entire book. It's like the first third of Autumn Twilight abridged into kind of like an hour-long presentation,
okay,
with sword fighting and with like all the cool stuff. It was phenomenal and fantastic. And it's like, that's one of those scenes that became legendary, where people are like, yeah, I was there when Dragonlance was unveiled and I saw the first thing. Because at the 20th anniversary, they went and they found those old scripts and they did it again. And I was sitting in the front row because I am who I am. And I was mouthing along the entire time. I didn't get to see it the first time. I've never even seen the actual take. I just know the whole thing word for word because I'm that guy. It just fills me with such joy. Like, I love this series. I love this series. I'm super looking forward to talking about this.
Yeah. And that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to talk about it. Shivam's going to tell me he's not going to do any spoilers. I might ask him, because I read the first 6 books when I was very young. I think I have the main beats. I could tell you. Tanis has a weird love triangle with the good girl and the bad girl. Tasselhoff annoys everyone.
Look, man, 1984 cliches, right?
Yeah, Raistlin and Cameron are in a very dysfunctional...
Caramon, please.
Oh, Caramon. Well, that's one of the things also, is that when I was reading these books, I didn't have anyone to ask how to say any of these names.
For decades I said Minotaur instead of Minotaur, because I didn't know the island of Minos. I just knew it from Dragonlance. And I'm like, Minotaur, the first time you read it, that's the thing that comes to your head.
Like, I don't know how to say Raistlin's and Caramon's sister's name. I don't know how to say that correctly.
Kitiara.
Yeah, I think I called it Katara or Kitra.
Yeah, but you want to know why it's Kitiara? Do you want to know how I know and how everybody would know?
Because you asked.
Well, yes, of course I asked. But I don't always ask, because sometimes Margaret and Tracy are wrong. Like, they've said the names wrong, and it bugs me. But here's the thing, though. Kitiara, for instance, there's a point where in one of the books, Tasselhoff is explaining he's telling the story the way 3PO tells the story to the Ewoks at the end of Jedi, where telling it in super simplified language. And he calls Kitiara, labels her Little Cat Crown. Kit Tiara. Kitty Yara.
Ah.
Get it? Like a tiara?
A tiara. And I'm sure now the listeners are wondering who we are even talking about.
Well, we'll get to that in a second. But for instance, do you know why Raistlin and Caramon are named who they are?
I have no idea.
Because Raistlin comes from wasted man and Caramon comes from caring man. As in, that's their relationship. They've got a codependent, unhealthy sibling relationship as twins. They need each other. They rely on each other. One of them is wasting away, and one of them is like...
doing all the work.
I mean, Dragonlance is the first time I ever understood, like, the mentality of, like, alcoholism or depression, or what it means to just be, like, abusive in an abusive relationship, or, like, codependent. Like, all of these things that... It's now that I think about it, is incredible how much life lessons these guys are packing into stories that you just thought were about fireballs and draconians, right? Like, it's wild to think that the heart of these stories is about these human relationships, of how we deal with things in the real world, But when you're like 10 or 11 reading it, you're just like, that guy's got a blue dragon, run! Oh, gosh.
I'm really excited to be doing this with you, Shivam. I'm
Yeah.
also sort of terrified about the amount of work I've given myself. I hope you're excited too, and I hope the listeners are excited. I just want them to know that Shivam and I have day jobs, pretty busy ones, and I know Shivam has like 2 other podcasts, I believe, maybe more. And so to be consistent on a release, we're hoping to do it every 2 weeks. We get really good at this, and I get really good at editing, maybe sooner. But that's the schedule right now. And then you can find me at False Logic on Twitter. That's about the only place I hang out. Shivam, go ahead. Tell us about your other podcasts and where people can find you.
So my main podcast is called Casual Magic, where I talk about the other hobby that I have, Magic the Gathering, which I delved back into specifically because Dragonlance died. So Dragonlance, I owe Dragonlance my biggest addictions. Not gonna lie. So yeah, my podcast Casual Magic with a new episode every Tuesday, and you can find me at ElectroTal for my main Twitter feed where I talk about politics and religion and fantasy, and then Girapuri Gears where I sit and talk about Magic the Gathering and just Magic the Gathering. We'll put these in the show notes. Please enjoy these shows, enjoy this trip with us, and remember, my friends, may your way be green and golden, as they say in the Dragonlance novels, when you're on your way to find a new adventure. We'll see you guys next time here on the Chronicles of Dragonlance.